On a quiet afternoon in a small American town, the grocery store looked exactly the way it always did. Bright lights hummed softly above long aisles. Shopping carts rolled slowly across the tiled floor. People moved at an unhurried pace, picking up familiar items, thinking about dinner, about home, about nothing extraordinary at all. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. And yet, on that ordinary day, something would happen that would quietly reshape two lives forever. Jack Miller walked through the front doors with the steady steps of a man who had learned to move through the world without drawing attention. He was close to 60 years old now, his shoulders broad but slightly sloped from years of carrying weight, both physical and emotional. His hair was more gray than dark, his face lined not from anger, but from long nights spent thinking about choices that could never be undone. People noticed him, of course, they always did. The leather vest, the heavy boots, the calm but distant expression. Some looked away, others stared a moment too long. Jack was used to it. Most of his life, Jack had been judged before he ever opened his mouth. Decades earlier, he had made decisions that led him down a road that felt right at the time, but slowly closed off other paths. Broken relationships, missed chances, words that were never said when they mattered most. He was not proud of all of it, but he carried it quietly, like a man who understands that regret is not something you can outrun, it is something you learn to walk beside. The Iron Road Riders had become part of his life during a time when he felt he had nowhere else to stand. To the outside world, the name alone brought assumptions, but to Jack, it was never about rebellion or danger. It was about order, structure, a sense of belonging when everything else had fallen apart. Over the years, the noise faded, the thrill faded. What remained was routine, long rides, early mornings, simple errands like this one. That afternoon, Jack was not thinking about the past or the future. He was thinking about cereal and coffee and getting back on the road before traffic picked up. He moved slowly down the aisles, nodding once at a clerk who had seen him before. There was comfort in familiarity, comfort in being unnoticed. What Jack did not know was that just a few aisles away, a small child was walking through the same store carrying a fear far heavier than any bag of groceries. And that fear was about to reach out, silently, to the one person most shoppers would never expect. Jack had learned over the years that life rarely announces its turning points. They do not come with warning signs or dramatic music. They arrive quietly, hidden inside moments so ordinary that most people pass right through them without ever realizing what was offered. For someone his age, that understanding came with clarity. You stop rushing. You start noticing. You learn that being present matters more than being important. As Jack turned toward the cereal aisle, he had no idea that the next few minutes would ask him a question he had avoided for most of his life. A simple question, really, one that has nothing to do with strength or reputation. A question about whether a man who once made many wrong choices would recognize the moment when a right one finally mattered. And in that quiet grocery store, under steady fluorescent lights, Jack Miller was about to find out whether the road he had walked for so long still had room for redemption. Jack turned into the cereal aisle without any sense of urgency. His pace was slow, unremarkable, the kind of walk that blended into the background of everyday life. He reached for a familiar box, scanning the shelf more out of habit than need. That was when something made him pause. Not a sound, not a movement loud enough to draw attention, just a feeling, a quiet awareness that something nearby did not belong. A few steps down the aisle stood a young girl, no more than 7 years old, walking beside a tall man. Her hand was wrapped around his, but there was no comfort in the way she held on. It looked stiff, forced, like a child clinging not out of trust, but out of necessity. Jack noticed her eyes first. They were wide, fixed, searching the aisle as if she were looking for something she could not name. When her gaze met his, she did not smile. She did not look away. She simply raised her free hand, slow and deliberate, folding her fingers inward before lowering her thumb across her palm. Then she closed her fingers over it. The motion was small, almost invisible, and yet it struck Jack with the force of a memory he had never expected to need. Late one night, months earlier, Jack had sat alone, scrolling through his phone, half listening to the radio. A short clip had caught his attention. It showed a simple hand gesture, a silent signal, a way to ask for help when speaking was not safe. He remembered thinking it was a good idea, something useful for younger people to know. Then he had kept scrolling. Life moved on. Now, standing in the cereal aisle, that same image rose sharply in his mind. For a moment, Jack told himself not to jump to conclusions. Children waved all the time. People misunderstood situations every day. He had learned, the hard way, that assumptions could ruin lives. The man beside the girl noticed Jack's stare and shifted his posture, his grip tightening just slightly. It was a small movement, but Jack saw it. Years of watching people had trained him to notice what others missed. The girl's hand remained raised. Her fingers trembled. Jack felt the weight of choice settle into his chest. He could walk away. He could tell himself it was none of his business. He could finish his shopping and be back on the road within minutes. No one would blame him. No one would ever know. But something deeper stirred, something that had been quiet for a long time, a voice that asked not what was easy, but what was right.
He stepped closer, keeping his movements calm, unthreatening. His expression stayed neutral, almost friendly. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. As he approached, the man beside the girl shifted again, his shoulders tightening as if preparing to leave. Jack smiled faintly, the way older men do when trying to appear harmless. He spoke gently, addressing the child, not the man. He asked if she liked cereal, if she had a favorite kind. The words themselves were unimportant. What mattered was the tone, steady, warm, normal. The man interrupted quickly, saying they were in a hurry, pulling the girl slightly closer to him. Jack noticed her head shake, just once, barely visible. That was enough. Jack nodded as if he understood, then pointed down the aisle. He mentioned something about a spill near the end cap, something the man might want to avoid. The man glanced away for a brief second, and in that small opening, Jack knelt down, bringing himself to the girl's level. He leaned in just enough for his voice to reach her ears and no one else's. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "You did the right thing." He rose slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket with practiced ease. Without drawing attention, he pressed the emergency feature, the one that sent his location and a silent alert to local authorities. He held the phone steady, his body positioned just slightly between the girl and the man now. The man's voice sharpened. He demanded to know what Jack was doing. Jack met his eyes, calm and unyielding. There was no anger in his face, only certainty. He told him to stay calm. He said help was already on the way. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood there, solid and unmoving. Within moments, the man's confidence broke. He released the girl's hand and moved quickly down the aisle, disappearing toward the exit. Jack did not chase him. He did not need to. He placed his jacket gently around the girl's shoulders and guided her toward the front of the store, his presence steady, his focus absolute. In that quiet aisle, a silent signal had been seen, and because it was not ignored, everything began to change. The walk toward the front of the store felt longer than it truly was. Jack kept his steps measured, his body angled slightly so the girl stayed close without feeling trapped. He could feel her trembling through the leather jacket resting on her shoulders, a quiet reminder of how much fear a small body could carry without making a sound. He spoke softly as they moved, not asking questions, not pressing for details, just simple words meant to steady the moment. He told her they were going to stand near the checkout, where people were around, where help could find them easily. Around them, shoppers continued their routines. Carts rolled past, a register beeped, a clerk laughed at something a customer said. The normal sounds of the store acted like a blanket, dulling the sharp edge of what had just happened. Jack knew how important that normalcy was. Panic would only make things worse. Calm, he had learned, was a language people understood even when words failed. They reached the front of the store, stopping near a display of magazines and bottled water. Jack positioned himself so the girl could lean against the counter, her small hands gripping the edge as if anchoring herself. He stood beside her, not towering, not looming, just present. He kept his eyes moving, scanning without appearing to watch, listening for footsteps that might signal trouble returning. When the first sound of sirens reached them, faint and distant, Jack felt the tension in his chest loosen just slightly. He did not smile, he did not react outwardly at all, but inside he allowed himself one quiet breath of relief. The girl looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for confirmation. He nodded once, slow and steady, the way older men do when they want to reassure without making promises they cannot control. The sirens grew louder, then faded as vehicles stopped outside. 2 uniformed officers entered the store, their movements calm, their expressions focused. Jack raised a hand gently, signaling without urgency. One of the officers approached, lowering his voice as he asked what had happened. Jack explained simply, a child, a silent signal, a man who left when he realized attention had been drawn. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. The officers listened closely, one kneeling to the girl's level, speaking in the same calm tone Jack had used. She answered quietly, nodding more than speaking, her trust fragile but present. Jack stayed where he was, close enough to be reassuring, far enough to give her space. He knew when to step back. Years of mistakes had taught him that sometimes the right thing was knowing when your role was done. Outside, another patrol car arrived. Store employees were gently redirected. A manager offered water. Life adjusted around the moment instead of stopping for it. That, too, mattered. Jack watched the process unfold with a sense of detachment he did not expect. He was not reliving his past. He was not seeking redemption in the eyes of strangers. He was simply standing where he was needed. When the officers confirmed that the man had been stopped in the parking area, the girl's shoulders finally relaxed. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a very long time. Jack felt something settle inside him then, something quiet and unfamiliar. It was not pride, it was not relief alone. It was the understanding that calm, steady choices could carry more power than force ever could. As the officers continued their work, Jack remained still, grounded, present. In that ordinary grocery store, he had done nothing extraordinary. He had noticed, he had stayed, he had chosen not to turn away. And sometimes, Jack realized, that was all it took. The truth came together quietly, without drama. As the officers spoke with the girl and checked their information, the story unfolded piece by piece. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 7 years old. She had been taken away from her family days earlier while playing at a local park. Her mother had searched every hour since, holding on to hope even when exhaustion threatened to take it away. The man who walked her through the store was not her father. He was someone who believed silence and fear would protect him. When Emily's mother arrived, time seemed to slow.
She rushed through the store doors, breathless, her eyes scanning until they found her daughter. The moment they saw each other, everything else disappeared. Emily ran forward, and her mother dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her as if letting go would mean losing her again. No words were needed. The sound of quiet crying filled the space, not loud or desperate, but deep and relieved. Jack stepped back instinctively, giving them room. He turned his head slightly, staring at a shelf of greeting cards he had no intention of reading. His throat tightened, and he pressed his lips together, steadying himself. He had seen reunions before in his life, but never one that carried so much weight. For the first time in years, he felt something soften inside him. Not pride, not recognition, just a sense that something broken had been gently set right. Emily noticed him before her mother did. Still holding on to her mother's hand, she looked back at Jack, her eyes calm now, no longer searching. She let go and walked toward him with careful steps. Jack knelt down again, unsure of what to say. Emily reached into her pocket and placed a small object into his hand. It was a tiny angel charm, worn smooth from being held too often. "This is for you," she said quietly. "You helped me." Jack closed his fingers around the charm, nodding once. He thanked her, his voice steady despite the emotion rising behind it. Emily returned to her mother's side, and Jack stood, slipping the charm into his jacket pocket. He did not stay for questions. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He simply walked out into the afternoon light, the familiar sound of his boots grounding him with each step.
In the days that followed, the story spread quietly through the town. Local news mentioned a man who noticed a silent signal and stayed when it mattered. They used words like hero. Jack did not watch. He did not correct them. He returned to his routines, riding familiar roads, stopping at the same store now and then, always slower, always more aware. What stayed with him was not the attention. It was the understanding that redemption did not arrive with grand gestures. It arrived in moments when a person chose to be present, when a hand was raised and someone decided not to look away. For those listening today, especially those who have lived long enough to carry regrets, Jack's story offers something simple and powerful. It reminds us that no matter how many years have passed, there is still room to do good. Age does not dull purpose. Experience sharpens it. Calm, awareness, and compassion are strengths that grow with time. Sometimes the smallest signals carry the greatest meaning, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is the decision to notice, to stay, and to care.